A sales manager offered an elderly couple $1,800 for the last car their son ever drove, a firefighter who died answering a call. He told them, "Sentiment doesn't add value to an appraisal." He had no idea the man standing 3 feet away, pretending to look at a different vehicle, owned all 22 dealerships in the company and was about to write a personal check for that car himself. What happened next? The manager brought on himself, one text message at a time, to understand how Darnell Ashworth ended up standing in his own garage at home. Months later, looking at a fully restored Honda Civic that wasn't his. We have to go back to a Tuesday morning in March, the day he stopped trusting his own regional reports. Darnell Ashworth opened his first garage in 1999 with $6,200, a rented bay behind a hardware store in Birmingham, Alabama, and a single handwritten sign taped above his workbench: "Fix the car. Tell the truth. Charge what's fair." He had grown up watching his father work as a mechanic for a dealer who paid him badly and lied to customers cheerfully, and he had decided early that if he ever ran anything himself, it would not run that way. 26 years later, Ashworth Auto Group operated 22 dealerships across 5 states. Darnell was 49, with the kind of build that still remembered manual labor even though he had not changed an oil filter himself in over a decade. He had a corner office in the Birmingham headquarters and a dashboard of regional performance numbers that, on a Tuesday morning in March, told him everything was running well. The complaints told him something different. Over the previous 4 months, the customer relations team had flagged a pattern, not loud, not the kind of thing that triggers an automatic investigation, just a low and consistent hum of dissatisfaction concentrated at the flagship Birmingham location. Elderly customers, single women trading in vehicles alone, people, in other words, who research on negotiation tactics, consistently identifies as less likely to push back in the moment and less likely to file a formal complaint afterward, even when something has clearly gone wrong. The regional director's explanation was always some version of the same thing: difficult customers, unusual circumstances, nothing systemic. Darnell had learned, over 26 years, that nothing systemic was a phrase people used when they had not looked closely enough to find the system. He opened his closet at home that evening and found an old flannel shirt and a pair of jeans he had not worn since before the company's 3rd dealership opened. He put on a baseball cap that had nothing to do with any of his brands. He looked at himself in the mirror and saw, for a moment, the man who used to fix transmissions for grocery money. He decided that man should go take a look around. Before we go any further, we'd love for you to hit that subscribe button. Your support means the world to us, and it helps us bring you even more powerful stories. Now let's begin. The Birmingham flagship dealership occupied 4 acres along the highway access road, its lot full of vehicles arranged in careful rows under string lights that made everything look slightly more valuable after dark than it actually was. Darnell walked the lot on a Thursday afternoon in the kind of unhurried way that signals to salespeople either serious interest or none at all, and within 90 seconds a young man in a button-down shirt approached him with the practiced warmth of someone who had been trained to read body language for profit potential and gotten it slightly wrong in Darnell's case. "Afternoon. Looking for something specific?" "Just browsing," Darnell said. "Maybe something reliable. Used sedan, nothing fancy." The salesman's name tag read Marcus. He could not have been older than 24, with the particular alertness of someone still new enough to a job to be paying close attention to everything around him, including things he had not yet learned to stop noticing. He led Darnell toward a row of sedans, talking through features in the unhurried rhythm of someone who had not yet been trained out of actually listening to what a customer said they wanted. Darnell let him talk. He was watching something else. Near the trade-in desk at the back of the showroom, 2 people were sitting across from a man in a sharply pressed shirt with a lanyard that read Trent Calloway, sales manager. The woman was perhaps 70, with silver hair pulled back neatly and hands that gripped the edge of her purse the way hands grip things when they need something to hold on to. The man beside her was a few years older, tall but slightly stooped, his hand resting over hers on the armrest between their chairs. Marcus's voice trailed off mid-sentence. Darnell noticed the young salesman's eyes drift toward the trade-in desk too, then quickly away, the particular flinch of someone who has seen this scene before and developed a reflex for not watching it. The car parked just outside the glass doors was a Honda Civic, older model, well-maintained but clearly not new, a faded firefighter Union sticker still affixed to the rear windshield, the kind that does not come off easily and that someone had clearly never wanted to try removing. "This car belonged to our son," the woman said. Her voice did not break exactly, but it moved carefully, the way voices move when the speaker is managing something large with great precision. "He was a firefighter. He died responding to a call 11 months ago." She looked at Trent Calloway, who had not changed his expression. "We kept the car as long as we could. We just can't manage the upkeep anymore. The medical bills from before, and now this." Trent nodded, with the rehearsed sympathy of someone delivering a line he had delivered many times. "I understand this is emotional for you both, but sentiment doesn't add dollars to an appraisal. The market price is the market price." He slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. 1,800. That's already generous given the mileage. The woman's lower lip trembled. "It's not just a car to us. It's the last piece of him we have left." "I understand," Trent said, in a tone that made clear he did not and would not, and was already moving toward the next part of the transaction. "The offer stands at 1,800. We can do the paperwork right now," or gestured toward the door, not unkindly, but with the specific efficiency of someone closing out an interaction that had stopped being profitable to extend. Darnell felt something tighten in his chest that had nothing to do with the sedan Marcus was still gesturing toward. He thought of his own father years ago, explaining to a customer exactly why a part needed replacing and exactly what it would cost, and refusing every single time to pad the number even when the customer would never have known the difference. He thought about what it meant that a system he had built was now sitting $1,800 away from a grieving mother, and calling that generous. He stepped away from Marcus toward the trade-in desk, holding his cap in one hand. "Excuse me," he said. "I couldn't help overhearing. I'm in the market for a car myself, and that Civic out front caught my eye." Trent looked up, faintly irritated at the interruption. "It's not for sale. It's a trade-in. I might be interested in buying it directly," Darnell said. "What's the trade-in value?" Trent hesitated for half a second. 1,800. Darnell raised an eyebrow. "For a car in that condition? That seems low." Something in Trent's posture shifted, not toward honesty, but toward competition. He did not like being told his number was wrong by a stranger in a flannel shirt. "It's an older model with significant mileage. I could go to 5,000 if you're serious." The room went quiet. The elderly couple looked between Trent and Darnell with an expression caught between confusion and something that had not yet permitted itself to become hope. Darnell turned to them. "Can we talk outside for a minute? I want to step outside the events of that afternoon for a moment, because there is a piece of this that did not happen in front of Darnell, and it matters." Patricia Mercer had not wanted to come to the dealership that day. She had said so to Walter twice in the car, and twice he had said the same thing back to her, that they did not have a choice, that the insurance had covered the funeral but not the months after, that her hip surgery was scheduled for April, and there was no version of their finances that worked without selling something. She understood the logic. She had agreed to the logic. She had not agreed, somewhere underneath the logic, to actually sitting in a chair across from a stranger and hearing him say the word "sentiment doesn't add value" while she could still smell, faintly, beneath the new car air freshener. The dealership's detail team had used the particular smell of her son's cologne in the upholstery. She had told herself she would not cry in front of strangers. She had failed at that, slightly, and she was embarrassed about failing, which made the whole thing worse. When the man in the flannel shirt stepped forward, she had assumed, briefly, that he was simply another customer who wanted to look at something else in the showroom and was inconveniently positioned near her. Grief. She had not expected him to ask a single, simple, devastating question. What's the trade-in value? She had not expected the number to move. She had not expected, in the parking lot a few minutes later, to be handed a check and told that her son's car was not going anywhere. Outside, away from the glass and the showroom lights, Walter explained the rest of it. David, 28 years old, 3 years on the department, killed, responding to a structure fire in a neighborhood 2 miles from where he grew up. The car had been his pride. He had bought it used, with his own first real paycheck, and kept it immaculate. Patricia wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. You don't even know us, she said. Why would you do this? Because some things are more important than the bottom line, Darnell said. He ran his hand along the hood of the Civic. This car meant something to your son. It means something to you. I don't believe in profiting off that just because the business model says I should. Walter swallowed hard, his voice thick. He would have liked you. Darnell felt the weight of that land somewhere he was not braced for. Behind them, the glass doors of the showroom opened sharply. Trent Calloway came through them with the particular speed of a man who has realized, several seconds too late, that something has gone wrong in a way he does not yet understand. I need a word with you, Trent said, ignoring the Mercers entirely. Right now. Darnell handed Walter the check, quietly. Take this, he said. Drive your son's car home with pride. Walter shook his hand, said thank you in a voice that did not have much room left in it for more words, and the two of them walked toward their own car, leaving Darnell to face Trent alone. What the hell do you think you're doing? Trent's voice was low but sharp, his cologne arriving a half-second before his words did. Helping a customer, Darnell said. Isn't that the job? That's not how this works. Trent crossed his arms. You just cost this dealership thousands of dollars and undermined my authority in front of my own staff. Authority, Darnell repeated. I didn't realize your job was to squeeze grieving parents for every available dollar. Trent's eyes narrowed. Look, I don't know who you think you are. Who I think I am, Darnell said, and something in his voice changed, not louder, just suddenly and unmistakably certain. He reached into his jacket and produced a card. Ashworth Auto Group. His full name. I own this dealership. I own all 22 of them. Trent's face went the particular shade of pale that happens when blood pressure and disbelief arrive at the same moment. His mouth opened. Nothing came out for several seconds. The showroom around them had gone quiet in the specific way rooms go quiet, when everyone within earshot has simultaneously decided to pretend they are not listening while listening completely. A few salespeople had stopped moving. Marcus stood near the sedan row, very still. I just watched you tell a grieving mother that her son's memory wasn't worth more than $1,800, Darnell said. And I want to understand something. If I'd been just another customer off the street, would you have done that exact same thing? Trent tried to recover his footing. I was doing my job, maximizing dealership profit. Isn't that what you want? No, Darnell said. That's not what I want. That's greed wearing a job description. Marcus Webb stepped forward. He had been standing near enough to hear all of it, and something in his posture had shifted from the careful stillness of an employee trying not to be noticed to the deliberate stillness of someone about to do something he had decided to do. Mr. Ashworth. His voice was quiet but steady. 6 weeks ago, Trent told me to use the same approach on a different customer, a woman trading in her late husband's truck. I told him I wasn't comfortable with it. He took out his phone, scrolled, and held it up. He sent me this afterward. Darnell took the phone. The message, dated 6 weeks earlier, read, always. Close grief deals fast. They don't negotiate when they're crying. You want to keep your hours, you do it my way. Trent's face had gone from pale to something closer to gray. That's taken out of context, he said. There isn't a context that makes that sentence better, Darnell said. He handed the phone back to Marcus. Why didn't you report this 6 weeks ago? Marcus looked down for a moment, then back up. Because I needed the job, and I didn't know if anyone would believe me over him. He's been here 3 years. He hits his numbers every quarter. I'm new. He paused. I'm not proud. of staying quiet. But that's the truth. Darnell nodded slowly. I appreciate the truth. I needed to hear it as much as I needed to hear what just happened with the Mercers. He looked around the showroom at the gathered staff, 6 or 7 employees, who had stopped, pretending not to watch. How many of you have been told to do something similar? Lowball a grieving customer. Push extra fees on someone who didn't. Ask the right questions. Target people who seem less likely to push back. Nobody spoke immediately. Then an older salesman near the back, his name tag, Red Tim, cleared his throat. It wasn't just him, sir. It's how things have worked here for a while. We've all seen it. Most of us didn't love it. But it paid the bills, and questioning it felt like it might cost us ours. Darnell turned back to Trent. You're terminated. Effective now. Trent's jaw worked. You can't just. I can, Darnell said. And I am. Trent looked around the showroom at the staff, who were not rushing to defend him, gathered his jacket from the back of a chair, and walked out through the glass doors without another word. The sound of his footsteps faded into the parking lot. Darnell called a staff meeting for that same afternoon in the small break room with the coffee machine that had clearly seen better decades. He did not stand at the front of the room like an executive delivering remarks. He leaned against the table the way he used to lean against his workbench when he had something real to say to a customer. I know what some of you are thinking, he said. You're wondering if this is a speech that ends with nothing actually changing. I understand that doubt. I'd have the same doubt in your position. He let that sit. I'm telling you, it's not. We're not adjusting a policy here and there. We're changing how this location does business, starting today. Tim raised a hand, not dramatically, just the gesture of someone who needed to say something practical. Sir, I believe you. But some of us have families, depending on this paycheck. If commission structures change overnight, how do we make rent? That's a fair question, Darnell said. Here's the answer. Starting this quarter, commissions are tied to customer satisfaction scores, as well as sales volume, verified scores, collected independently, not self-reported. If you treat people honestly, you do not make less money. In most cases, you make more because people come back and they bring other people with them. He paused. I know that sounds like something I'm supposed to say. I'd ask you to give it 2 quarters before you decide whether I meant it. Marcus spoke up. What happens to the customers who already got a bad deal? Before today? Darnell nodded, like he had been waiting for that question. We're going to find out exactly how many there are. That evening, he sat with the dealership's customer complaint file going back 14 months. There were more entries than the regional summary reports had ever reflected, complaints that had been logged, technically, but softened in the language used to escalate them, categorized in ways that made patterns harder to see, unless you went looking specifically for the pattern. Elderly customers. Customers trading in a deceased family member's vehicle. Customers negotiating a loan. He picked up the phone and started making calls himself. Mrs. Donnelly, this is Darnell Ashworth, the owner of Ashworth Auto Group. I'm calling to personally apologize for the way your trade-in was handled last September. The silence on the other end lasted long enough that he wondered if the call had dropped. Then a disbelieving exhale. You're calling me? Yourself? Yes, ma'am. And I'd like to make it right. He made 11 calls that night. Each one took longer than it should have. Not because the corrections were complicated, but because each person on the other end needed a moment to recalibrate their understanding of what companies were capable of doing when something had gone wrong. Trent Calloway had not invented the technique he used on Patricia and Walter Mercer. He had learned it himself 3 years earlier from a sales manager named Doug Presley at a Ford dealership 2 states away, a man 20 years his senior, who had taken him aside during his second week on the job and told him, almost paternally, that the customers who cried were the easiest closes in the business, because crying people want the conversation to end more than they want to win it. Trent had felt uneasy about it at the time. He had also watched Doug Presley earn Manager of the Quarter 4 times running, and uneasiness had quietly lost to ambition the way it often does when nobody around you treats the uneasy feeling as worth listening to. By the time Trent became a manager himself, the technique had stopped feeling like something he had been taught, and started feeling like something he simply knew, the way a language you learned, as a child stops feeling like a language and starts feeling like the only way to think. This does not excuse what happened in that showroom. It does explain why Trent, standing in the parking lot, with his jacket in his hand, did not entirely understand what he had done wrong even as he was being fired for it. Somewhere, underneath the anger on his face was a flicker of something closer to genuine confusion, the particular disorientation of a person discovering, very late, and very publicly, that a rule he had built his whole professional identity around was never actually a rule. It was just a habit nobody had stopped him from keeping. Darnell thought about that, driving home that night. He did not feel sorry for Trent exactly, but he found himself wondering how many other Trents were out there, in how many other showrooms, each one taught by a slightly older version of the same man, each one convinced they had simply gotten good at their job. The system did not need a villain to keep producing this outcome. It only needed nobody to interrupt it. 6 weeks later, the National Council on Aging published an updated framework on what its researchers termed the grief exploitation window, the period following a significant loss during which a person's capacity for financial negotiation is measurably reduced, not due to any deficit in intelligence or ability, but due to the simple cognitive load of grief itself. The Federal Trade Commission has separately documented the prevalence of sales tactics, specifically timed to exploit that window in high-value transactions, auto sales prominent among them, precisely because trade-ins involving a deceased family member's vehicle are common, predictable, and easy to identify in advance. Darnell had not read either document before that Thursday afternoon. He read both that week. He built what his team began calling, somewhat informally, the Grief Protocol, a mandatory company-wide policy that any trade-in involving the vehicle of a deceased family member would be reviewed by a second manager before a final offer was made, with appraisals required to reflect documented market value rather than manager discretion, and with a standing rule that no commission could be earned on a trade-in completed within the same visit as a customer disclosing a recent death in the family. Cooling off period, mandatory, no exceptions. Marcus Webb was promoted to assistant sales manager 3 months later. Tim began training new hires on what honest negotiation actually sounded like. Not a script, just a habit of explaining numbers clearly enough that a customer could understand exactly what they were paying for and why. Darnell visited the Birmingham flagship twice a month, after that, unannounced, the way he should have been doing for years, before a regional report finally told him something his own instincts had been trying to tell him for much longer. On a Saturday morning in late September, Patricia and Walter Mercer drove back to the dealership. Darnell had called them 2 weeks earlier to ask if they would come by, without explaining exactly why. He met them in the lot, and he walked them around to the small service building behind the main showroom, where the Civic had been sitting in a private bay for the past 5 months. The car had been fully restored. The faded firefighter union sticker on the rear windshield had been carefully preserved. Darnell had instructed the restoration team specifically not to touch it, even when removing and replacing the entire rear glass would have been easier without it. The interior had been detailed, the upholstery repaired rather than replaced. Where it could be salvaged, the engine fully serviced. Patricia stood in front of it for a long moment without speaking. She reached out and touched the sticker on the back glass, the way you touch something you were not sure you would ever get to touch again. "We can't afford to take this back," Walter said quietly. "We sold it to you. Fairly. We don't expect you're not buying it back," Darnell said. "I'm giving you the keys. It was never really mine to keep. I just didn't want it gone before I could give it back to you the right way." Patricia's hand went to her mouth. Walter looked at Darnell for a long moment. The particular look of a man recalibrating, again, his understanding of what people were capable of. "Why?" Walter said. Not really a question. Just the word, because there was nothing more precise available. "Because some things are worth more than what they cost," Darnell said. "And because your son sounds like he understood that better than most of us ever will." He handed Walter the keys. Patricia got into the passenger seat the way she must have done 100 times, when her son was alive and Walter started the engine, and the sound of it, familiar, ordinary, exactly the sound it had always made, filled the small service bay in a way that made several people standing nearby go quiet without quite knowing why. Narrator reflection: I keep thinking about the phrase Trent used that afternoon. Sentiment doesn't add value to an appraisal. On its face, it's not even wrong. A market price is a market price. A used Honda Civic with a certain number of miles on it is worth roughly what comparable vehicles sell for, regardless of who drove it or why it mattered to them. The math checks out. What the math leaves out is the moment. The National Council on Aging's research on what they call the grief exploitation window documents something that should not need a formal study to be obvious, and yet apparently does. People negotiating in the immediate aftermath of significant loss are not operating with their full capacity for self-advocacy. Not because grief makes people stupid, because grief is exhausting in ways that compete directly with the kind of alert, adversarial thinking that negotiation requires. The Federal Trade Commission has documented how certain sales environments are specifically structured to take advantage of that exhaustion, often without the salesperson involved ever consciously framing it that way to themselves. That's the part that unsettles me about Trent. I don't think he saw himself as a predator. I think he saw himself as good at his job, closing deals efficiently, hitting his numbers, not getting emotionally derailed by every sad story that walked through the door. Somewhere along the way, someone had taught him that efficiency and decency were opposites, and he had never had a reason serious enough to question it, until a man in a flannel shirt was standing 3 feet away, pretending to look at a different car. I wonder how many of us have a version of that lesson sitting somewhere, unexamined, a thing we learned to do efficiently, a habit we picked up from someone who taught it to us as smart business that we've never actually stopped to ask whether it's also cruel. What would it take for you to notice? Disclaimer: this story is a work of fiction created for reflective and entertainment purposes. The dynamics of elder financial exploitation and grief-based predatory sales practices that it depicts reflect documented patterns. The National Council on Aging maintains research and resources on elder financial abuse at NCOA.org. The Federal Trade Commission provides consumer protection, guidance on auto sales practices, and how to recognize predatory tactics at FTC.gov/consumer protection. If you or someone you know has experienced financial exploitation following a loss, both organizations offer accessible, practical resources